HaMitzvah Mashlima Mosayim, the 200th mitzvah. He shetzivonu loses the Rambam uses in all the other places the word litain in the mitzvah kotze potem it's the schir is peger aber aleph kappa says l'shalem. I don't know, loses probably is a better reflection of the Rambam's general opinion. What the Arabic word means, I can't say, but schar sochir. You're supposed to give the schar sochir b'yoymoy on its day. We have to understand what the day means, okay? I think there's a new definition of day. Okay, what is sochir? Sochir is not limited to a poil because it includes also a problem. So Fush Gmoba Mitzia, Kufi Bezamad Aleph, and the Ram in Schir is Pek Yiralef Halacha Gimel, Nosna B'chatzi Ayoim, Kimet Shokolov Achamo, Oiva Mishum Baltolin, Shakablonis Kischiris he, Chayiv Litin Lo Bzman. So it's very clear that Kablonis and Schiris are Hainu Hak, at least in terms of Yom Titain Schol. It's Fush Gmoba. Now, the Ram says, Lo yachrehu liyoim acher. So a priori it's double talk, but on the other hand, he's telling you what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And maybe not only is there mitzvahs aseh to do something, but if you don't do it, it's not only a bittul aseh, but it's an isa aseh. And that's clear in Mitzvos Yisrael Lamed Ches that there's an isa aseh of b'yom titain schor. Reish Lamed Ches. What will you sell? From this boy, who asher im icher schoroi oibolai saser, okay. He says, ואם הוא יסוך הלילה, הרי זה גוי בכל לילה, כל לילה, אלא הוא כבר קיבל שכור, או מישראל ויום תיתן שכורוי. ראש המשנה, סקר, אין לו אלא שני מצוות, אלא מצווה אחת, ונאמרו בו שני לאווים להשת דין המצווה, והוא שמשנה וכולי, כבר נסבוי דין המצווה בשיב, שום נסבוי שזה מיוחד בשכיר להיות. אבל שכיר גוי, הרי אויבה אולוב בעשה, ואומר ישראל ביום תיתן שכור. So Ram says that's not our interest whether goy or Jew, but he says that the aseh of Yom Titin Schora is an isa aseh. Oiva olov b'aseh, v'hu omer b'Yom Titin Schora. Okay. That's what he says. Ulam b'schir goy oiva olov b'aseh. Now, next. V'omer yis'aleh b'yom titet schoroi v'din mitzvah zo she'es schir yoim goy ve kol halayla ושכיר לילה גויבה כל היום, כמו שנביא במצווס לא יעשה ריש למד חס. That's all from there. And what is he stressing over here? That there's a definition of day which might be different than the day of the Torah. Because if he's a day worker, you have until the next morning to pay him. Because the chiyuv starts when the avodah, when his moch is finished, which is at night, and it goes throughout the night. V'din zeh sheyeh schir yoim goyve kol halayla, u'schir layla goyve kol hayoim. If he's a night worker, then he has the whole day to pay him. So the mitzvah is, it's two things. There's an Aseh, maybe, which the Ram clearly says there is, but there's also shlo yachreu liyoim acher, that he has to do it. The mitzvah is, the kiyuma mitzvah is within that time reference of a day. Either it's the 12-hour period after the culmination of the avodah, schir yoim, the whole night, it's schir laila kol hayoim. So the Isa is because of ikiyuma mitzvah. So at the moment that it traverses the end of the day, that day, whichever day it is, the 12-hour period, is the Isa. So we don't know here if he's referring to the Isa or he's defining what the day is. Lo yachrei liyoim acher. So there could be two options over here in what he's doing. There certainly is an Isa Aseh that you see in Reish Lamed Ches, Oiva B'Aseh. The question is here, is he focusing on that or he's focusing on the definition of what the day is? Din mitzvah zo, sheyeh schir yoim goyve kol halayla, u'schir layla goyve kol hayoim. Kmo shenivayeh b'mitzvos aseh, mitzvos lo yisaseh reish lamed ches. Ukfor isba'aru mishpatei mitzvah zo b'shleimus b'tshi'i mi-mitziyah. The ninth parak above Mitzvah. V'shom his boyer. Now this becomes a little bit sticky because it's not. V'shom his boyer shezeh mechuyev or zeh choyva b'chol schir yoim. Bein goy, bein Yisrael. Mitzvah aseh lifroye b'zmano. It's independent whether it's a goy or a Jew. And that you see also in Reish Lamed Ches, at the end, we read, V'shom nizboya shezeh miyucha b'schei Yisrael bovad delav hu asher im iches chor v'bolo yisaseh. Avo schir goy hari hu oiva olav ba'aseh v'omo b'yomo titet schor. So it's clear in both places there's an aseh by a goy. However, that's clear by the lois aseh, it's clear in all the kisvei yad. However, when it comes to the aseh over here, this line, v'shom izboyer, shezeh choiva b'chol schir yoim ben goy ben Yisrael mitzvah aseh lefloy b'zmanoi, it's in Ibn Tibin, it's in Ksaviyat Kapach, However, in Ksavad Achsvud, Bloch, that this whole sentence is not there. But even in Bloch, this sentence appears in that there's an Aseh by a goy appears there the Reish Lamed Ches in all the Kisrei Yad. There's a major problem over here because you look at the Mishnah when it discusses the Schir Yoim in Perek Tes, Mishnah Yud Beis, Ger Toishov, Yesh Bo Mishum B'Yom HaTiten Tzchorah. So the Mishnah clearly says they were talking about a Ger Toishov. So this idea that there's a mitzvah B'Yom HaTiten Tzchorah is very clear in the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvas. In Mishnah Torah, it's not there, and it's not there in the Mishnah. So we have no clue of what happened. And worse than that, it's against the Mefurish Gemara. The Pashta Mishnah, why you say Ger Toshav if it applies to a goy? And more than that, there's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, Nun Zayin Amar Aleph. The Gemara says like this: El lekovesh schar sochir. You don't give him the schar sochir. Nochri benochri, benochri be Yisrael also. Yisrael benochri mutter. You're allowed to be kovesh schar sochir. There's no isa. I'm a fool shady isa the reisa lichbosh schar sochir. Shall goy. So lechera, if there's no isa of lichbosh schar sochir, so lechera there's no isa of ipilon bzman. If you're allowed not to give it to him, lechera you don't have to give it to him on time. And here it says the opposite, that there's a mitzvah to give it to him on time by a guy. So a priori, the word goy, even though it's very odd, in two places, he says goy, and he really means both here in Reish Lamed Ches, Lisa said, he really means a ger toshav. This is very difficult. There is an option to say you could say that B'yom HaTiten Tzchorah is not an Isa say, it's just a bittul kiyum say. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin is talking about Isurim, so krevish schar sochir, there's no Isa. You just mevatel and asay. However, it seems to be very clear that certainly, even if you say that Shlo Yachreu is saying that he's just defining when the mitzvah is, but L'choyim Reish Lamed Ches, it's very clear that Isa Aseh. So if there's an Isa Aseh, so the Gemara says Mefurish, you're allowed to be kovish schar from a goy. There's no Isa, the Reisa. And also the Rambam Mishnah Torah is also Mefurish like the Mishnah. In Shkir is Perek Yiralef Halacha Beis, Kol HaKrevish Schar Sochir Kilu Notal Nafsho Mimenu Shnev Ve'elav Hu Noisei Es Nafsho V'Oiver V'Albo As Horois V'Asei. Not only in Mishnah Torah does he talk about 2 grounds we have to see. First of all, he says, Mitzvas say litain schasocha b'yoyma. And then he says, V'ger toishav yesh bo b'shum b'yoyma titit schora v'im ichein oiva b'lei sasa. So it's mefulish that we're talking about ger toishav. And he's also mefulish in Mishnah Torah that there's an Isa. And he talks about Yom Titin Scholar. So that's what we have at the moment. The Rambam is mafurish like the Mishnah and Mishnah Torah. Here, we don't understand where the guy came from. Okay. There's a major problem here. Okay. So first of all, we don't understand where the Rambam is coming from. The Mishnah says Ger Toshev, the Rambam says Goy. That, let's say you can swallow that. The problem is the Mishnah is machalik between, and we don't know what the Mishnah is doing. A priori, let's read it. The Mishnah says in Perek Tesibon, but see a Mishnah base. Ger Toshav, yesh bo mishum b'yom titin tzcholoi, v'yein bo mishum le'solin pula socher itcha boik. So the Rambam says in Perek Yirav Locha, Ger Toshav, yesh bo mishum b'yom titin tzcholoi, v'yem ichroi eino eva b'lei sasa. So it means by Ger Toshav, there's an Aseh and there's no loy sasa. Okay, you read the Mishnah, look at the Rambam, sounds okay. But the Rishonim don't look at the Rambam at all. And they say the Mishnah is not being machalik between Aseh and loy sasa, but the Mishnah is being machalik between Teres Kohanim, Sefer Vayikra, and Mishnah Torah. Because in Teres Kohanim, it says Reacha. And the Kavonah is Timotzi a Goy and a Ger Toshav. Under both the Aseh and the Lois Aseh. And in Mishnah Torah, it says Ger Chashem B'Sharecha. So in the Mishnah Torah, Ger Chashem B'Sharecha, so then it applies to a Ger Toshav under all circumstances. So all the Essen and the Azhoris in Mishnah Torah apply to a Ger Toshav, and everything which is said in Sefer, in Teres Kohanim, does not apply to a Ger Toshav because it says Reacha. And here the Psukim. And that's what we should have learned, Rashi and others. The pasuk says, "Lo sashik." In Teres Kohanim, "Lo sashik es reacha, v'lo sigzo, v'lo solim pulas sochi itcha boike." So it applies to the whole case because there's reacha. So then you could discuss whether it's gzelas akum is mutter, but "Lo sashik es reacha, v'lo sigzo, v'lo solim pulas sochi itcha boike." So they learn that everything in Teres Kohanim says reacha does not apply to a goy. However, in Mishnah Torah, it says like this: "Lo sashik sכיר oni v'avion me'achecho o meger chashem b'sharecho." So there's a lovely sashik, and it applies to a ger toshav o meger chashem b'sharecho b'yom titin tzchor, which also applies to ger chashem b'sharecho, even though it's the pasuk before. V'leisovo lov hashemesh ki onihu also applies to a ger toshav. So it means everything in Mishnah Torah applies to a ger toshav, and everything in Teres Kohanim does not apply to Ger Tosh. And certainly not to a Goy. And there's no discussion of Goy at all. So the Rambam is not only difficult for the Mishnah, Goy is difficult from the Psukim. Rashi in Bava Metzia, Kuf Yiralef Beis, give him Aschel Der Toishev, Yesh Mishum Yovetit Tzcho, V'kol Shekain Mishum Lashok Tzcho Loisashok Ksochir, De Begavek Si B'Shorecho. Because in the pasuk in Mishnah Torah it says B'Shorecho by Loisashok. Then Divamas Ein Boy Mishum Loisolin, Ein Boy Mishum Loisolin the Teres Kohanim. In Sefer Vayikra, v'chein mishum leisashem leisigzol, the Teres Kohanim, because the whole thing doesn't apply to a guy. Zeres Hakom also. V'hai did not karhanim mishum leforish b'hu schir yoim v'schir laila. V'ochikom yesh bo mishum b'yom matiten tzcholo the mishtoi gabe schir laila. V'ebo mishum schir yoim. Okay, so it means that the difference is not between the Aseh and the Aseh, the difference is between Teres Kohanim and Mishnah Torah. And this is the Kavona, the Chidushim HaMiyuchosim LeRitvo, in Kuf Yud Aleph Beis, for Rav Moshe Kosav, the Ger Toishev, Eino Oiva B'Leisaseh, Ela B'Aseh, the B'Yom Titin Tzchor, V'zetei Magodol, for Sugi L'Shmai Toloi Mashmo. So you can add the Psukim L'Chai are also not like that. And it's not only the Rishonim, but Kvega also has he's goes against the Rambam in Pirush Mishnayis, in Bava Metzia Perek Tes Mishnah Yud Beis. Ois ein Wov, Tois Yonte v'Maschel Mishum, V'Leis L'Sof, B'Vadai Kach Nil V'Pshutoi. Do Mavur B'Sugya, the time of the Maslis Nereacho, Mamayek Ger Toisho, V'Hainu Kor the Teres Kohanim. So it did not the Teres Kohanim Pash Kedoshim, Dichsim Leis Tasreacho, V'Leis Solon. Aber by he, the Mishnah Torah, V'Pash Kiseis, Dichsim Leis Shashlik Scharoni, Migercho, V'chihechi, the Amina Demaksi B'Yosei Parsha, B'Yomatit Tzcho, Koi Gama Megercha. Even the pasuk is a different pasuk. Ochinami Alav, Tichsiv B'Haikor, V'Loi Sovoi, is also only on. Is also on a Ger Tosh. It's also on a Ger Tosh. The mechitese lechalik b'haikor. They don't say about lois b'yom the lav the loy sov. It's the same pasuk. V'chein nira Rashi lehedi braysa v'yishmol v'chulei v'ulam. He says, I'm skipping a little bit. B'Rambam reish perek yiralef milchus schirus pasuk mitzvas l'shalom schasrocher shenem v'yom titei tzchol v'ichro li'achazman oy v'v'loisa shenem v'loisovoi. The Ger Toishev yesh bo mishum b'yom titin tzcho v'michoi eino oiva b'loisaseh. How imavu lehedid the Ger Toishev eino oiva Allah avdoleis over. V'chei mashma lehedid b'oro'o. He means the chinuch mitzvah tov kuf peches v'tzorch iyun godol. That's what Kvega is. This is very difficult to say the least. Frankly, I found one of the Achronim who tried to help the Rambam, but in my opinion, it's only half baked. You know, you have to get to the end. If you only take off half of the kasha, you haven't done that much. It's a sefer called Minchas Yitzchak and Minchas Chinuch. So he says that the Ram doesn't learn like Rashi, because Rashi interprets the Mishnah when it says the Mishnah Ger Toishev yesh bo mishum b'yom titin tzchoroi tachavor lahachlil. The whole Sefer Mishnah Torah, even though it says Ger Tosh Yesh B'Shum L'Miskor. V'zeh gam lav. V'loi sashek soch schir oni v'evyoin. V'loi sovel av hashemesh. Tichsiv somoch lebiyom titin schor. And Rashi explains v'evo b'shum le'solin is referring to Parshas Kedoshim. And it refers to everything in Parshas Kedoshim, which he doesn't have the lavli sashik is leacho, and the lavli sigzo, and the lavli solim, which is in Parshas Kedoshim. So why is the Tana machalik between the lav and the aseh? It should be machalik between the two parshas. So this is a good kasha. But how do you end up interpreting your Mishnah, because the Mishnah looks that way, which is against, not supported at all by the Psukim, and changed the whole world around? It sounds good, but I don't think you can get anywhere. Then it's Tzorchi and Godel. The Ram is a double Tzorchi and Godel, because he says we're talking about a goy in Sefer HaMitzvos. Both here in Reish Lamed Ches, in Mishnah Torah, he moves back and says we're talking about a Ger Toshav, but you still, the difference between Aseh and Lois Aseh, and there's no explanation of how he reads the Psukim. The Mishnah, okay, but let's say Mishnah against the Psukim, the way you read it, that's okay. That's what it seems to be. I don't know if we learn. I don't understand that. Now, let me introduce Rav Sadigoy. In the Sefer Mitzvas, which was recently published, of Rav Sadigoy from the Geniza. Now, he says like this. This is in Perek Vov. Ha'tsha'esrei lo yitche b'koyach es ha'poyel ha'sochi ha'toveya eschor. He's coming to be paid. Lo oimo le'solem pula sochi itcho ad boiker. So the interesting thing is, he only is moina and aseh. I'm a lois aseh. Loisolin pula sochi itchad boiker. But the aseh b'yom titin tzcholoi, he doesn't count. So maybe that's the shitosoi. The b'yom titin tzcholoi and pula sochi. If you have an aseh and a lois aseh, which the mirror image of each other, and one does not include anything more than the other, then it's counted as one. What it means is the Rav Sadigoy is chaylik on the whole shorish shvi'i, and then if you have an aseh and a lois aseh, which is hainu hach, you count it only as one. So then you have to say, according to him, there's certainly no difference between the aseh and a lois says v'az ger toshav. You have to say whether you're paskening in Parshas Kedoshim or in Parshas in Mishnah Torah, l'chera, everything has to go together. There's no difference between the aseh and the lois aseh, both in Mishnah Torah and in Kedoshim. In Kedoshim, it refers only to Yisrael, both the aseh and lois aseh, and the aseh and lois aseh in Mishnah Torah apply to a ger toshav, and therefore you only have to count one. Kedaka b'kodesh of Sadigoy, when the aseh and the lois aseh are the same, he only counts one, as he says in the Chasimas HaSefer at the end of his Sefer HaMitzvos. Okay. I don't know what more to say. I don't know exactly how to, it's nice than Ksav at Oxford that the part of Shkir of Goy is not in the Ksav Yad, but it's there in Reish Lamed Ches, and a priori, the Ram is Torah B'Dvar Mishnah, because the Mishnah says Ger Toshav, not Goy. It's also Psukim. No, the question of how to read the Mishnah and to read the Mishnah gets it. Okay, so at least the Mishnah supports it. But what he has over here in Sefer HaMitzvos is a priori chesed, Torah B'Dvar Mishnah, if you may say so. Now, we have the next mitzvah, Reish Aleph. HaMitzvah ho'achas umosayim. He shetzivonu lihiyois. He's going to be a lot of fun. He shetzivonu lihiyois. He shetzivonu lihiyois. Hasochir oichel bi'eis avoidosoi. Me'adovo shi'avoid boy. Okay? So means what the discussion is, the poil is oichel b'shas pulasa me'amachuba, whatever, okay? So that's the mitzvah. So let's introduce it. If you look at the psukim are very descriptive. But there's no imperative, there's no verb which demonstrates an imperative, a command. Kisovoy becherem reacho v'yachalta nov v'chulei. Kisovo bekomas reacho v'kotafta melilois b'yadecha. So what, there's a mitzvah of v'yachalta? The poil is Mekayim mitzvah say by eating? So we have a mitzvah, if you look at it, a priori is religious law. It should be something like a sharana. And the truth is, the word lihiyos, which you'll find also in the Minyan HaKotzer, the Rambam has many sharanas canned in the Nusach and Minyan HaKotzer as lihiyos. Okay. Interesting over here. If you look at the Arabic says bikon. Now, bikon is a very interesting expression. Okay, let's just show you where it is. You have the word bikon by Mishmoris, with the Rambam's sheet in Sefer HaMitzvos that setting up Mishmoris is a mitzvah Aseh. You have it in the mitzvah Aseh of Tmura. You have it also in Neter Avoy, in the mitzvah Aseh of Neter Avoy, at the Peiris HaKodesh on Shana Reviz. You have it in Schar Poil. And you have it also in Yibum Chalitza. Okay. Now let's go off Yibum Chalitza. I don't understand why he does it. That I can't help at the moment. And I'll deal with Mitzvah when we get to it. So what the word bikon is, Mark Human told me the translation is, in the little Arabic translation, it's a state of being. B'matzav shel. The mitzvah is the state of mishmoris. The mitzvah here is the state of achilas poilim b'shas melacha. The state of tmura after you say the word Tmura. It's in the state of Kedushas Tmura, the state of Kedushas Peris Levoi. There's no command. There's no real verb. It's just to be in a state. So the Rambam uses a similar word in other places, but it's very different. Yikon, tikon, that is a poil osid of yiyeh, and that could be a command, that's the way it should be. But when you talk about that poil eating is just a descriptive state of being in the state of. I can understand that the Rambam and Minyan HaKotzer trying to express this idea. There is a word for it in Arabic, but in the Hebrew of the Rambam's time, there was no b'matzav shell. There was no such word. So he says liyos. And then whatever you would translate shurano as, however, there's no exact word in the Hebrew that we know. So the Rambam says also liyos min hakotzer. So here it becomes very sticky because there are two concepts that the Rambam has established. There's a concept of shrana, religious law, which has with it an implied command, but there's no command. The Torah just tells you what the law is. The Rambam assumes that if the Torah tells you there's a law, one has to abide by the law. And then there's psukim which describe certain states of being by mishmorais, states of mishmorais, or tmura, or levoi, or achilas poalim, that there's no tzibur in anyone. There's just an assumed imperative that this state should be extant, should exist. So there's a basic problem because the Rambam introduces this type of mitzvah called bikon in mitzvah lamed vav. And there's no explanation or discussion of why such a thing is a mitzvah. When it gets to shrana in mitzvah tzadihei, in the mitzvah forest the dorim, he finds it necessary to have a whole diatribe of why there are mitzvahs called shrana. The first Sefer is the Dorim, Lodun, Mechomokim, and he explains it. And he goes out of his way to say a Shran is also an Amal, also a command. And here he just says it's a command of a state of being without explaining it at all. However, we have no clue what the difference between Shrana and Bikon are, because they're both Psukim in the Torah. They're both, there's no imperative in either. In all the cases, we don't know there's a kiyum mitzvah at all in any of them, and we have no clue who the mitzvah's on. Whether the mitzvah's on the poil, we don't know anything. The Ram just says, bikon, a state, a matzav. The mitzvah is Marcel Kodesh. We don't know who the mitzvah's on. That the Tmur should be Kodesh. I guess everyone has to act. We don't know what the mitzvah is exactly. We don't know there's a kiyum, and we don't know who the mitzvah is on. And there's no clear tzibur. It's only based on psukim. So to make two categories, not to have a clear idea what the difference between the two, is slightly difficult. But the truth is, for me personally, there is something positive over here. Because, I looked at the mitzvah Tmura when I was a kid. I said to myself, what are you supposed to do? So it's a bikon that that we should, or there should be a state of Tmura where who the mitzvah we have to know. But v'hoyahu is masiyah kodesh. The same thing in Neteravoi. Same thing in Mishmo. It's the same thing in Schapoil. In the Achilas Koil in B'Shas Malach. Okay, that is the first comment. I think that I've explained it somewhat, at least what the issues are, and they're certainly very close because the Rambam, in many cases, is Shana. Sometimes says Lodun, but in Minyan HaKotzer, many times he'll say Liyos. The same way he says Liyos by all the mitzvahs, which are Bikon. So even though there might be a difference, we don't use different Arabic words, we have no clue what it's all about. And in Minyan HaKotzer, he equates them all. So this becomes very, very, very difficult. However, even though it's only a state, the Ram and all the mitzvahs Bikon quotes Amal. And he quotes it also by the mitzvahs of Shrana. He calls them Amal. So there is a command, I guess an assumed command, from the fact that Torah says this is what the law should be. So that's where we're standing. And the problems in Shrana and in Bikon are the same. We don't know if either one is a kiyum, and we don't know who the mitzvah is upon, and there's no clear command. Now, the Rambam is going to switch his approach from Sefer Mitzvos to Mishnah Torah. And the Rambam is going to take the approach that the mitzvah of Achilas Poalim is not a bikon, to be in the state of something, but it's a plain amal. It's like all of the mitzvahs of the Torah, and he claims the mitzvah is on the balabais. The chayu is chazaboy. See, in Lamed Vav, by Mishmos, was also chazaboy. But the difference is, he knocks the whole mitzvah out, at least that part of the mitzvah. The chiluk mishmos is not part of the mitzvah in Mishnah Torah, if you recall, you look back. The mitzvah is only that there should be no chiluk in regel. So you really don't have the idea of bikon anyway. Or maybe that, you have to know. But over here, he's completely, a complete about face in terms of whether it's a bikon to be in the state of, or it's a regular mitzvah. And it's an amal, and the mitzvah is on the balabais, and it is a kiyum if he doesn't. The Ram Perek Yud Beis Halacha Aleph of Schiris Hapolim Shein Oisin B'Dover Shegdulim in Oretz B'Chulei Hare Al Bal Habayis Mitzvah Shianiach Oison Le'acho. There's a mitzvah on the balabais. Mima Shein Oisin. So it's very different. Here in Sefer Mitzvahs, he doesn't at all discuss who the mitzvah is incumbent upon. It's just the state. And maybe we have no clue of who the mitzvah is incumbent upon. Okay? However, in Mishnah Torah, the mitzvah is incumbent on the balabais. And very clear. And it's a regular mitzvah. So the chinuch sounds like the Ram Mishnah Torah, because in Mitzvah Tov Kuf Ayin Vav he says Mitzvah Oleinu Lohaniach HaSochir Lecho. It's giving the sochir the opportunity of eating is the mitzvah. And you can imagine if the Baal Habayis lets the poil eat, he is Mekayim a mitzvah. The question is how it becomes a bona fide mitzvah. So now you started the opposite way. There's no new type of mitzvah over here. It's like the general categories. But you ask yourself, there's no tzivui mefurish in the Torah. And it's just a pure like religious law. So call that a bikun or shrana. How do you say the mitzvah in the Baal Habayis? Well, the Torah doesn't even mention the Baal Habayis. The Torah is only speaking about that the poil eats. He sova b'kerem reacho v'yachalta anov v'knavshecho. Sovecho. He sova b'komas reacho v'kotafta molilas b'yodecho. So l'cheira, the best you have is an assumed command, but you have the same thing in Shrana. So what happened over here? Why does the Rambam fall off? In fact, in Protei Mitzvos, we have no clue of where the Rambam is standing. Because you look at Protei Mitzvos, the Rambam says like this: Hilchos Schiris and Mitzvah Yudalid. He says like this: Sheyochal hasochir min hamechuba she'asaboy. With sheyochal. On one hand, he has a real verb. But does it mean there's a mitzvah on the poil to eat? Or just the poil is allowed to eat? On the other hand, it says sheyochal. So maybe it's really on the Baal Habayis. So the words in the Protei Mitzvos are not clear, but there is a verb which is usually absent in Bikon. Now, next. So the question is, we said the Ram Mishnah Torah says that the mitzvah is on the Baal Habayis. You know, how do we know this? Where does this come from? So the truth is, we have Rabbeinu Chananel to base it on, and Shit Lubetz is Bob Metzia. Peizayin on base. V'chein kos Rabbeinu Chananel zal, v'zeh l'shoyne. Mal kerem shkein chai be'oilois, shenem v'kam cholei soilel, u'kishem shenischayev bal kerem lo niach oilois laniyim, kach chayev lo niach apoel lecho min oanovim, avoshad dvorim she'im bohem laniyim klum minayin v'chulu. So it's very clear in Rabbeinu Chananel there's a chiyuv on the Baal Habayis to let the poil eat. We don't know where this comes from. Okay, so now we set up a whole new frame of reference. It's absolutely amazing. Okay. And the question is, What exactly happens over here? Is the Rambam basically saying we have to then look over Tmura and Lavoy, that basically Bikon doesn't really exist? Or, in different words, that the Bikon has within it an assumed command, and a Bikon shouldn't be looked at like a Shrana. We have no clue why that should be. Or the Ram says that a Bikon B'chal, and it's the mitzvah Regila on the Balabayis, a normal mitzvah, like everything else. That we understand. And that's the way, a priori, we should go, unless we see otherwise. Here now you have a Gemara in Sanhedrin. And the question is, what's the issue? What's the issue? So you could say the Ram is Choyz in Mishnah Torah and says that it's not a Bikon. That's the way you should go. And the Ram over here says it's a Bikon. So why should he go this way? Why should he go that way? So there is a Gemara in Sanhedrin. It's very interesting. Not sure. We'll see how much we'll get through here. The Gemara goes like this. Nun Zayin Amar Aleph or Sanya ala Gezel Gonav v'Gozel v'chein Yefas Toya v'chek Yoytze b'Nochi v'Nochi Nochi b'Yisrael also Yisrael b'Nochi Mutter. And then the Gemara, what's the Brisa talking about? So the Gemara comes with this. Omar v'Acha v'Yaakov lo nitzcha elo lepoel bekerem. Poel bekerem emas. What are we talking about? Ibeshas gemar melocha heterohu is lati. V'ila b'shas gemar melocha gezelhu. So l'chera pshat Gemara is that by a poel ben noyach and even a balabayis ben noyach, there's incumbent upon the balabayis to let the poel eat. B'shas melocha. Rab Chaim discusses this in two places. In Shiur Beit Chaim HaLevi, in Bava Metzia, and Chiddush Rab Chaim HaLevi. Okay? Basically, the amazing thing is, it's verbatim. Ki'ilu Rab Chaim has copied, that's the only way it could be, copied from the notebook in Volozhin, the Shiur Volozhin on Bava Metzia, and transcribed it into Chiddush Rab Chaim HaLevi. In two places, he adds one word. Okay? And let's just go through and see what he says. In Chiddush Rab Chaim HaLevi, it's in Hilchos Me'ilah, Perches Halocha Aleph, B'dibra Maschel V'nira. The poel ikechiyuvoi mikre dover shebemoino shebemomon. It's a dover shebemomon. It's a monetary issue. The chiyuv is a monetary issue. And then in Volozhin, he write it in brisk in the Chiddush Rab Chaim, he adds the word uschus. Ikechiyuvoi mikre dover shebemomon uschus. The Afagav Mishal Shamayim who oichel. It's a sugya where the poeloch Mishal Shamayim Mishalo from the Balabayis, or Mishalo or his, maybe his, what he on. Hainu she'ein loy his chayves al Balabayis. But as Mishalo oichel, there is his chayves al Balabayis. But when it's Min Shamayim oichel, Mishal Shamayim oichel, or Mishalo Oichel, it's certainly a Chiyuv Mamoin and in also a Schus according to what he added in brisk. Even if it's Shemayim, Ukiroma Gemara, Hanafkamina Le'inyan Lita Le'ishto Yabonov. That's only as far as giving it to others. Avol miho dieshlo rishus lecho. Rishus lecho? But what is rishus lecho? Here he adds a few words. V'zeh have din u'schus momon. And the schus was added also in brisk. Din momon or din schus momon. Okay. Fulay lezeh mehod the mavu b'sanhedrin after Zion yain so mepirish Rashi b'ram perik tes milchus malachim the benoyach etzel benoyach oichel. So how does it come? How does that happen? Why should the benoyach etzel benoyach happen? They didn't have tayag mitzvahs. They weren't at Sinai. The im nemo the loy have a rak mitzvah by the whole chefsa of this is a mitzvah by is to give completely detached from schus and din mamoin. What does it do with ben noach? Im kemei chitese yino exeis be ben noach elavadai da having din mamoin olohochi hu shenoik be ben noach dali hu bechlal dinim v'gezel. So that there is what Reb Chaim added in Chedusha Reb Chaim HaLevi that there's a schus mamon l'chera is probably from a Fush Gemara. Because the Rambam learns, the Reb Chaim learns, and he learns in the Rambam that it's not a heter to take things, not a heter gzeila to take from Azulas, but the poil has a schus to take. And l'chayr it's a mefurish Gemara in Bava Metzia Tzadi Beis Aman Aleph. I amet mishal shamayim oichel lididei zochi le rachmona le ishtoi ulevonav le zochi le rachmona. But it's a schus. He has kinyonim in it. It's a schus. Also, you find he uses the word dinim and the word gezel. Dinim, we'll see a mitzvah show, take it up much more next week, believe neder. Dinim is the Ramban and Pash Vayishlach. That the dinim by Ben Noach includes Oino and the Zokim and this, and includes Dinei Poel and the Din of Achilas Poel. The Rambam, it's Gezel. In Perik Tes, he says that there's Gezel. And we're going to have to try to understand what does that mean. If it's Dinim, we understand how it got to Ben Noach, just like all the other Dinim, which we also don't understand, but it's not an isolated phenomenon. And in the Dinim is a Schus Mamon. But if it's Gezel, you don't know if it's Schus Mamon, or you know there's no Isa Gezel. And you don't, for the life of you, understand how such an idea got to Ben Noach. So Mitzvah Shem will pick up the rest of this mitzvah and try to understand how the Rambam learns the Bava Metzia, the two psukim, Tshuva from Rabbi Yeshua HaNogid, what's going on in the Gemara, and how the Rambam learns, the Shnei Ksuvim, and what's shot in the Mishnah, the Rambam learns the Mishnah, Ve'elo Oichel Min HaTorah, and the Mitzvah Shem will proceed on to the Mishnah of, to the Mitzvahs of Prika and the Mitzvah of Tina. Have a nice week.